So, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Balraj. I'm the namesake behind the brand, Kler.watch. And just as a brief introduction to myself and I guess the brand as a whole, I spent 6 years in manufacturing, in car manufacturing. I then decided to go and get a diamond diploma to try and go into the jewelry trade. Got the diamond diploma, and I decided, well, okay, nobody's going to take me seriously if I'm wearing my G-Shock. So I decided, okay, well, I'll go and try my luck at the boutique, at the Rolex boutique in particular. So I went down there, as naive youngsters usually do, and asked the salesperson, and for those of you who are familiar with how Rolex allots their watches, I basically got rebuffed. So I walked away without the job, the Rolex, and it had occurred to me that actually I didn't want the Rolex, I wanted something a bit different. And the thing that I wanted that was different was I wanted to have my name on the piece that I was wearing. So, as you can probably appreciate, we don't have any heritage as such, so we don't have anything to draw from. So one of my favourite eras of watchmaking is the late 70s and 80s. And for those of you that don't know the late 70s and 80s, they were arguably the final hurrah for the Swiss watch industry, mainly because of the Quartz crisis that happened shortly after. So when we look at some of the pieces which I've drawn from my collection, you start to see sort of an idea, you start to get an idea of the volumes, the shape, the way that it catches the light, the fact that the chamfers are quite broad-shouldered, everything is very accentuated. You might be asking, well, how do I know this is from the 70s and not the 80s? Good question. This was actually presented to someone as a leaving present, Seed Hill Finishing Co., in appreciation of 25 years service. So, sorry R. William Anderson, I've got your watch. But for the purposes of today, you get to see where we start to draw our influences from. And in particular, with the way that these pieces are very sculptural and they share elements, like the way that the face, the actual dial is round, but the case is made in such a way that it doesn't really so much catch the light as it does whole surfaces, whole planes capture the light. I'm doing quite a bad job there. There we go. And you can actually start to see where we got our methodology from. Now, I briefly mentioned the Quartz crisis, and arguably the culprit behind it was a little company that we probably all have heard of, and that is none other than Seiko. These guys absolutely dominated the 1970s, our period in time that we've chosen to draw influence from. Hello Gavin, thank you for joining. So you get to start to see where we're drawing our influences from, who we're being indirectly and directly influenced by. And although these three watches are very different in size and function and thickness, they all have a common DNA. They all have a common theme running through them, and that was the style of the period. just bring another one out. This is, none of these work by the way, so I need to get them serviced at some point. But you get an idea for where we've started, our starting point for how the brand got its styling influences. Oh, I'll do that. And where we're headed with our own watches. So we have these pieces as the foundation, but obviously you need to build on the foundation. So we did, in a fashion. This very tattered and worn Italian notebook starts to give you some idea as to the genesis of the brand. You can start to see we're thinking about how it's going to fit on the wrist, the dimensions, and every one of these squares, by the way, is 5mm, so it gives you some idea of how big it is. And again, you can see we're playing with layouts, making sure that everything sort of fits into a very rough footprint of what came before. So it's marginally different. The problem with sketching in 2D is this. It's 2D. You can't actually wear it. As obvious as that sounds, that limitation can lend itself to some design oversights. So, how do you overcome that? Well, there's a few ways around it, and we've tried them all, and they all work with varying degrees of success. I'll leave this here actually, makes a nice backdrop. So, we have the foundation, we have the blueprints, and now I want you to meet Genesis. This model, which somebody on the Scottish Watches Facebook page rather rudely referred to as bits of a hacked off fleshlight, was the beginning of turning that into something tangible, something that you can put on your wrist and wear. So you can start to see what's going on here. You can see very, very crudely, this is almost like caveman level modeling. I'll just do that so you can see it. That's better. You can start to see we're getting an idea of the volumes, of how thickness is going to be, how the lugs interact, and more importantly, how it feels in the hand. So we'll have Genesis and we'll leave that there. What's the next step? Well, it needs to be refined. So we have the next model, and if we put them side by side, you can immediately see a noticeable difference, not just in the colour, because this one was baked for too long and this one wasn't, but you can start to see, if we put them side by side like that, that there is a refinement in the proportions, there is a refinement in the lug curvature. You can start to see that. So this one was flat as a pancake, however with this one, put you here, you can start to see we're beginning to think about how this is going to sit on your wrist, how this is going to interact when you put it on a bracelet, where and when you would use this. And then also you can start to see where little design features started to creep in. So you can see the undercuts at the top of the case. You can begin to see, okay, oh, let's see, that's better. You can begin to see how the lug itself is being shaped across two axes. So I believe that's the Y axis and the Z axis, or the X axis. If there's any mathematicians, please correct me, as I don't profess to be a mathematician. But you can get a picture for what's coming next. So after this, the next logical step is to say, okay, we know roughly what we want it to look like. We know roughly the dimensions. How is it going to actually wear on the wrist? How much is it going to actually weigh? So the next step was this. And this blank gives you an idea, again, of some of the refinements that we've made. And it gives you another idea as to how much it's actually going to weigh on the wrist. Clearly, modelling clay is not going to weigh nearly as much as stainless steel or carbon fibre, or in our case, grade 2 titanium. But you get an idea for how this thing is actually going to interact when it sits on your wrist. Again, you can start to see the refinement in the lugs. You can begin to see we're starting to think about, okay, how are these Nimitz Crown Guards actually going to fit on your wrist? So put this side by side and you can start to see exactly what's going on. And you can see very, very subtle changes. So before, where they were offset, now they're in line. And all of this informs what's next. And what's next is moving into 3D. When you move into 3D, you begin to find out that there are some limitations to modelling with your hands. So the next stage was this. This is our very first attempt at a 3D print. Let's do that. And the way this works is not too dissimilar than a Lego set. So it all comes apart. So that fits into there, like that. So that's your crown guard. And then that is your timing bezel. And you begin to see some of the influences that we spoke about earlier, with the way that the lugs, the face, the way that everything is very short and tidy. Maybe there. But the problem is with this, apart from the fact that it's not particularly well made, is the fact that, for all intents and purposes, this is not realistic. So it doesn't include the clearances. Oh, I'll do that. It doesn't include the tolerances needed for the movement, the tolerances needed for the dial, the tolerances needed for the timing bezel, or, for that matter, how this crown guard is actually going to stick in. It's not even a hole for the crown at this point. So this, for all intents and purposes, is a styling exercise, but it gives you an idea as to what's coming next. So we'll put this here so it doesn't get lost, and we'll move these cards up to the side. There we go. And we'll leave these here like this. So, just to recap, we have the pieces which have influenced us. Then we have the blueprints of where we want to go. Then we have the 3D models, hand finished models. of what we intend to make, then we have our first attempt at a 3D print. And as you can see, it's a good start, but it needs a little bit of work. And the little bit of work that it needed was tolerances of the dial, the case back, the movement, and how this thing is going to fit together. And that is where this comes in. Although they look similar, they are in fact, or may as well be, two, let's just do this, completely different items. Although they share many styling similarities, you can begin to see actually the refinement in the processes. And surprise, surprise, it has tolerances for the movement, the dial, the case back. It has holes for the lugs now. Not only that, we've actually got a way of attaching the lugs on. Excuse me, crown guards. And clearances for the bezel. Put you there, like that. And we begin to see, actually, this is beginning to resemble an actual watch, as opposed to the styling exercise that happens over here. So you may be asking, well, it doesn't look that different. And you would be right. It doesn't look that different. But let me explain. So we'll take, for instance, the crown guards. The crown guards on here have, on the actual one which is going into manufacturing, is actually machined in a way so that it dovetail fits in with the case, like this. However, if we have a look at the styling exercise, that one is, yeah, not great, but it's a good idea. Next, we'll take a look at the bezel. If you look at the bezel, you can see, I'll just do that, you can see just how deep a angle, I want to call it, that the timing bezel is on. That's a stadium style bezel. And we look at this one, the angle isn't that deep. It's still a stadium style, but it's not as deep. And the reason it's not as deep is because we now have a bezel insert. This will be made of sapphire in the final version, and it will fit into the bezel like so. Hopefully we do a better job than most of aligning it, but it gives you an idea as to how things are going to fit on the final piece when all is said and done, like so. So we'll go over this one more time. We have our blueprints, where we've come from. We have our styling exercise, where we're going to. We now have our next step in the 3D print, which is the manufacturing clearances. There's just one problem. There's no dial. So how do we know what it's going to actually look like? And that is where this comes in. This is, let's bring it up here, a 3D print of the dial. The tolerances on this are 0.01 millimeters. I believe that's thinner than a human hair. and you can start to see some of the character that we're trying to build into the watch. You can see the Shippo pattern, our logo, repeated in the center. I'll just roll it like that. You can see our bookmark indexes, double bookmark at the 12, single at the 3, single at the 9. Then if we go down, you can see the date complication at the bottom, and just about make out, there we go, just about make out the other indexes, the 2, the 1, the 2, the 4, 5, 6, 7, beg your pardon, 7 and 8, 10 and 11. And this is what it looks like on a bracelet. You might ask, well, hang on a minute, why do you need to know what it looks like on a bracelet when we already know what it looks like? Good question. This is why. You need to know what it looks like on a bracelet because you need to know how it's going to wear. So I have a 7-inch wrist, I believe, and you can start to see all of the things which we've discussed over here start to filter into here. You can see the upturn on the lugs. That's there so that they don't dig into your wrist. Then if we turn around and do that, you can see our Nimitz style crown guards. The benefit of which is they don't protrude more than the actual crown itself, but they still offer some level of protection. The reason that they are styled that way is very simple, and that is so that when you bend your wrist, the crown guards don't actually dig into them any more than the crown would. There's only so much you can recess the crown in before it becomes useless. Everything about the watch needs to have utility, because otherwise it's no different than a styling exercise here. By building this utility in, we can actually save time down the road. And once more, you can begin to see some of the styling influences when it sits on a bracelet. The way although these are hidden, you can still start to see how we've styled the lugs in such a fashion that they catch the light not quite the same, but near as makes no difference. Once again, the way these have been styled, they've been styled in, well, they've been done in 3D in such a way so that they don't just curve one way, so they don't just curve this way, they actually curve that way as well, and the demarcation point is here. So the way the lugs have been designed is that they roll up and then they taper off round like that. So you can get a better idea of how this thing is actually going to sit on the wrist. And an added bonus of putting it on a bracelet is, if I can get my hand around it, you can start to play around with it. So we can wear it at the top, like so. You can see it then doesn't dig into my wrist nearly as much as it would with a traditional crown guard. You can wear it low. Even when you wear it low, okay, the crown's digging into my wrist, the crown guards aren't. The crown guards are serving their purpose of protecting the crown, but not making my life a misery just by wearing it. There were some observations that this might be a very uncomfortable wear because of the way that these dig in. So what I'll do is I'll just show you. If we go like this, put it on. As you can see, the crown's digging in. The crown guard is relatively, I mean, I'd have to basically contort my hand like that way for it to begin to be getting uncomfortable. And that was the other big thing that we wanted to build into this. We didn't just want to build in the utility, we wanted to build in comfort. In comfort, the only way you can really build it into these products is by prototyping. So for instance, you can see it's not flat as a pancake, there's a curve here. You can begin to see the lugs are short for a reason, so that it doesn't dig into your hand when you're wearing it. The way that the crown guard on both sides, not just that one, but that one as well, lifts up on Nimitz style crown guards. Oh, there we go, that's better. And you can get a better idea of what we're actually doing. So let's go over these again. We have our influences from the 70s, courtesy of this chap, what's his name? R. William Anderson. Thank you, R. William Anderson. You get to see our methodology, where we've drawn influences from, because we have no heritage of our own, so we have to go and get inspired. And in fact, if you look, a lot of the ergonomics, thank you Joe for reminding me of the word, stem from these pieces. So for how short the lugs are on this one, then you can see how this tapers down on this one. All of these things have their part to play into our product, and they all come together into this package. So if we have a look, take these guys out, at the sketches again, you can begin to see actually it didn't deviate too much from it, at least in 2D. But what made the difference, thank you Min, good evening, is all of this work that's gone into it. Because for all intents and purposes, these two don't look that dissimilar. However, it's only when you start to dig into the ergonomics, the way that it sits on the wrist, how you're going to use it, that you get a sense of what the person on the other end, the customer, will eventually experience. And if you've done your job right, the customer should never notice anything. The nicest thing a customer can say about your product is nothing. It should fit into their life seamlessly, and they shouldn't even notice that it's there. Especially with all these robberies that are happening right now in London. So we'll put this back on the wrist, and you can start to see how all of this comes together into a piece which you will be able to buy. But there's a problem, because as you can see, there's no end link. So although you can strap monster this because it's got 20mm lugs, standard fit and fair for anybody with a extensive NATO collection or a Zulu if you prefer. So what's the next step then? The next step is this. This is a fully articulating 3D printed, 3D printed bracelet that we are going to make only for this watch. It's never going to be repeated. There are not going to be any spares. What you see is what you get. Why? Because why not? You only get to make your first product once. Why settle for something less? So, you can start to see why the end links are, sorry, not the end links, excuse me, the lugs are so short. That is because the end links extend below where your wrist would sit. So all of these things come to play together in much the same way a Formula 1 car is a very highly strung object that goes very, very quickly. This is something of the opposite. So this is supposed to be the most comfortable watch you'll ever wear, ever. So you can see the curvature on the back, the ever so slight curvature. Then the fact that the lugs are so short. And then the end links, do that. The end links then extend below the case back. So actually your bracelet, this phone wants to play nice, there we go. Your bracelet actually articulates there as opposed to up here. And you may ask, well, why didn't you make female end links? And the simple answer is because there wasn't enough material in here to do that. So there's only enough material in there to run the spring bar through the back like that, but then not enough material to fix that as a female end link. That'll be something for the future. So you can start to get an idea as to what we're actually up to with this, and we'll speak more about this next week. So that is the story so far. If anyone has any questions, comments, criticisms, please fire away now and I'll answer them as best I can. But for those of you that joined late, just as a recap, we started by talking about some of the influences of my favourite period, the 1970s, late 70s I should say, mid to late 70s. Then we set the blueprint down for what the watch was going to look like, but it's not tangible at this point. And then we introduced Genesis, which is the very, very first model we ever made, or I ever made. From Genesis we refined it a little bit more, and you can start to see we're introducing styling elements, and then we refined it again, and then we moved the game along a little bit more by introducing curvature to the lugs and profiling. Then we moved to our 3D prints. Let's put this the right way around. There we go. And then when we had all that done, We then sent that data to the manufacturer, and this is what they came back with. And this fits like a Lego model. So this would be, do that so you can actually see what we've actually done in there. You can actually see we've put the markers into the insert. The insert then fits into there. And also one more thing, you just notice that little bevel, I don't know if you can see that, there we go, that sits in between the lugs and is styled in such a way, you can see what it's doing right there actually, but it just breaks up the lines on the case so they're not so harsh. When we move to this one, you can actually see they're in fully intended effect. So instead of having the chamfering, let's see if the bone wants to play nice, there we go. Instead of having the chamfering run across there, our chamfers are actually between the lugs. So that means they're not going to get scratched, dinged up, or battered so easily. And it helps to break up the weight of the case, because that is actually from top to bottom, and its thinnest point, by the way, I should mention this, this is only 12mm thick at its thinnest point. But here you can start to see why we've made it the way we have. It's just to break up the lines, break up the volume of the case. But that's too many spoilers. We'll talk about the bracelet next week. So that pretty much concludes the story so far. Next week we're going to talk about the bracelet, where we've gone, where we've come from, who we spoke to, and who's actually making this. So thank you for watching. If you've made it through this far, please comment, like, share with your friends, share with your enemies, share with anyone you like, and I bid you a good evening. Until next week.